Hey, welcome to Am I Famous Yet? This is Chapter 5, Loose Aspirations. So how did I get here? Every memoir I've ever read starts with a long biographical chapter that invariably leaves me thinking, so what? Get to the good stuff. But now as I sit to write my own, it seems like some version of my origin story is pertinent. I'll try to keep it as mercifully brief as I can. I was raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee, population 125,000, the son of a secular Jew and a devout atheist. My parents must have had a sense of humor in naming me Ivan in the predominantly Christian Deep South in the middle of the Cold War. In fact, my mom knew it was a screwed up thing to do because she told me that she wanted to give me a normal middle name, Peter, in case the whole Ivan thing proved to be too difficult. It was difficult, but I guess not ever difficult enough for them to start calling me Petey. My parents separated when I was 7 years old, reunited briefly, and eventually divorced when I was 9. I ended up choosing to live with my father when I was 12 to escape my narcissistic mother. My dad, though infinitely preferable in my preteen brain as a parent, also had his own issues that centered around being focused on his sexual relationships and his new wives. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this from an adult standpoint, but a child of a divorced household with self-esteem issues probably would have benefited from a little more personalized attention. Eventually, my dad went on to marry 3 more wives, all of whom I referred to as, quote, future former evil stepmonster number 1, 2, or 3, end quote. What started as a 12-year-old humorous moniker actually ended up being quite precociously prophetic, but that's a story for another time. Suffice to say that if there is ever a need to do some forensic psychology on my life because people on the news are saying, he was always such a quiet fellow, I never imagined that he had it in him, well, look no further than my preteen period. This was when most of the trouble started. Let me be clear. I dearly love both of my parents. My relationship with both of them matured wonderfully as I grew up. There were just a few tumultuous years in my formative period. My parents and step-parents all worked for a federal government utility, an FDR New Deal program called the Tennessee Valley Authority. This made us firmly middle class and suburban. I went to public school for elementary and junior high and to a private all-boys preparatory school for grades 8 through 12 in an attempt to escape the struggling Chattanooga public school system. My mother was president of the local chapter of the ACLU, National Organization of Women, and engaged in other leftist activist pursuits. As such, she was involved in a federal court case in Chattanooga seeking to prohibit the teaching of Bible studies in the public schools. They didn't win the case per se, though now the teachers must be certified, must avoid denominational controversy, and are no longer allowed to proselytize to the students. Baby steps, people. What they were requiring to do during my days at Rivermont Elementary School was to send a permission slip home with each student for Bible study. Unsurprisingly, mine came back stamped with a resounding no. Each week when the Bible teacher came into the classroom, little Ivan was made to stand up and march out of the room. Incomprehensibly, this did little to increase my popularity with or acceptance by my classmates. Who could have predicted? The only good thing that came out of this situation was that they had to teach me something else in lieu of the good book. They taught me how to read maps instead. This is a skill that ended up serving me well in my travels. Thanks, Chattanooga Public Schools. To escape this situation, off to a private school I went, a former military academy with heavy Christian leanings called the Baylor School for Boys. They dropped the military idea when it proved unprofitable during the Vietnam era. They eventually dropped the for boys idea about 4 years after I graduated, just after the time when it might have been advantageous in my life for me to learn how to talk to girls in my adolescence. Thanks, Baylor. If you ever saw the movie A Dead Poets Society, that could have been a documentary about my high school, except I would have been the kid who ended up killing himself at the end of the movie. In real life, it was nothing so dramatic. I was threatened with physical violence constantly, though very little of it ever manifested into fisticuffs. I got punched in the nose one time at summer camp when I was 7. A kid at my high school pulled a gun on me once. He got a slap on the wrist for it and managed to produce a fake gun for them to confiscate. I never saw the fake. They wouldn't show it to me. I have no idea whether it was the same thing he pointed at me. Whatever I was looking down the barrel of surely looked awfully real to me that night in the parking lot. The football team at this prestigious high school also threatened to physically cut off my long hair, a threat which became so well known on campus that the headmaster got wind of it. His response was that if it happened, he just didn't want it to be on campus and he didn't want to know about it. Can you imagine that? It was a warm and nurturing environment, to say the least. But it was a far better school than any of the other public schools in town. I remained there until I graduated, ranked 67th in my class of 100 kids. Certainly not the smartest, but not the dumbest either. Decades later, both the headmaster and the kid who pulled the gun on me requested me as friends on social media. I didn't accept either of their requests, but I didn't block them either. I decided that the very purpose of social media is to demonstrate to all of the miserable kids I went to high school with that my life is better than theirs. It doesn't matter if this is actually true or not. The important thing is the appearance that my life is better. Of the 100 kids in my class, I would estimate that approximately 5% thought I was a decent guy. Another 15% probably had no particular feeling about me at all. Maybe 40% ranged from neutral to just disliking me, and the remaining 40% actively wanted to participate in or to see physical harm done to me. It was not a comfortable situation. Recently, a classmate of mine told me that he appreciated the fact that I was always a good friend to him all those years ago. I found this comment a little jarring since I don't remember really having very many friends in school at all. Plus, I didn't remember doing anything for anyone that could be considered being a friend during those years. I was in no position to bestow friendship on anyone. I was just trying not to get my ass kicked. I think what my classmate was saying was that I wasn't a dick to him. That fact alone equaled being a good friend to him. This says much more about the general atmosphere of that school than anything specific about my personal actions. While in high school, I was editor of the literary magazine one semester and the yearbook another year. I ended up winning the drama award my senior year, mostly because I'd been in every school play put on during the course of my matriculation, though not due to my unflagging interest in the performing arts. My involvement in theater was a vehicle to get me out of the school's athletic requirement that would have necessitated me changing clothes and being naked in the locker room at the gym. As a late bloomer, this was a perilous situation to be avoided at all costs. I had athletic interests like kayaking and long-distance cycling, all solitary pursuits. But let's just say that I wasn't much of a joiner or a team player. Because of that drama award, somewhere in a dusty hallway in the basement of one of the administration's buildings at that school, my name appears engraved onto a 2-inch long strip of corroded brass that is nailed to a larger plaque commemorating all of the winners of that same award over the decades. It's identical to the plaque repeated innumerable times at country clubs throughout the land, chronicling the annual putting championships. While in high school, I also became more interested in music. I became an avid record collector. The first LP I got, the Jackson 5's Greatest Hits, came out when I was 7 years old. The first 45 RPM single I bought with my own money, If You Want Me to Stay by Sly and the Family Stone, came out when I was 9. I was hugely influenced by my mom's record collection, which contained Gladys Knight and the Pips, Ike and Tina Turner, Stevie Wonder, etc. She also had some Beatles, Stones, and some Broadway show cast albums, but the rock and theater records didn't have the same immediate resonance with me that the soul records had. Somewhere in my mid-teens, I was visiting my mom's family in New York City, where she was born and where I now live. My aunt's friend was a former record label publicist who had thousands of LPs in her apartment. She told me that they were all sent to her free of charge as a professional courtesy by other record label employees. Furthermore, she had duplicate copies of several titles and offered them to me for free since I seemed interested. My mind was officially blown. I returned to Chattanooga with albums by Elvis Costello and the Attractions, Devo, Patti Smith, Public Image Limited, The Buggles, and others. I now had a quest to find more free records. I started cold calling radio stations in Chattanooga and telling them that I knew that they received more records than they played. I was offering them the service of taking some of their surplus off their hands. Through some combination of audacity and complete ignorance on my part, this scheme actually worked. I would make runs to the stations, pick up several boxes of their cast-offs, and return to my teen lair to obsess over the spoils. I developed an amateur program director's ear by having to audition hundreds of LPs. It was glorious and gave me an escape from teen angst, taking solace in the music. I had an artistic vision around this time, which was to be photographed in an aggressive pose holding 2 flaming drumsticks while Bad Company sang Rock and Roll Fantasy. It would be a surefire hit. It couldn't miss. Fame would be mine. The only drawback was I didn't play the drums or any other musical instrument. My prestigious preparatory school, incredibly, had no music program at all. This was going to be up to me somehow. I got a job during the summer when I was 16, washing dishes at a dude ranch in the Colorado Rockies. I maintain today that this is my only true marketable skill. The ranch gave me my first experiences with alcohol, with cleaning 100 people's silverware 3 times a day, and being forced to kill the bats that had found their way into the lodge building. Were this a biography of a serial killer, that last sentence would have indicated the first signs of trouble. Musically, however, it was a ghost town up there. The Cabin Girls had an 8-track player with only about 3 tapes, Lynyrd Skynyrd Gold and Platinum, I think maybe a Rush album, who I didn't yet understand, and Joan Armatrading's Me, Myself, I, which they played incessantly for 3 months. While I think Joan is a wonderful singer and songwriter, I can't listen to her to this day as a result. The spoils of the Summers campaign yielded enough money to spend $425 on a used Fender Precision bass that I bought from my pal Rick, who was a year ahead of me at school. Rick and his brother had a band called Alfredo Garcia and the Mellotones, so they were cool by default. I began my senior year of high school enjoying the birthday present that I requested from my dad, bass lessons. For $15 per lesson, Rick got me started learning songs by ear on that Fender bass, which I still own all these years later. I was off to the races. By the following spring, I had played bass in the high school talent show. We played songs like Message in a Bottle by the Police and Limelight by Rush, who I understood a little better now. But most significantly, I was playing to a gymnasium full of kids who actively hated me, yet some were screaming in adoration. They weren't cheering for me personally. It was just something I was a part of. Also, since nobody had bothered to actually organize the talent show that year, it ended up falling to me to make all the arrangements. I charged $1 admission at the door and even took home a profit after I paid Rick the $100 for his sound system rental. Wealth and fame all in the same night? I was hooked. So it was all set. My eventual goals were to play on the Johnny Carson Show, David Letterman, Saturday Night Live, and at Madison Square Garden. 40 years later, I have done exactly none of these things, though I did a bunch of other stuff. As the expression goes, life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. I did make my mom cry once, however.